6 burning Bibles, disappearing crosses, shaking chandeliers. They sound like scenes from a Halloween horror movie, but a Bothell man says these are happening in his haunted home.
KOMO 4's Elisa Jaffe shows us what he considers proof and the moment that our cameras caught too.
This is not a Casper type ghost.
And this is no ordinary Bothell house.
Table, walked in, the table was on the floor.
When Keith and his girlfriend moved in 2 years ago, he says strange things started happening right away.
First thing we heard on day one was a kid cough coming from upstairs.
They don't have kids, but this IT guy did have cameras and started documenting disturbances. Keith claims items started moving, flying, and disappearing.
There are candles missing. One candle just got thrown, and there are 2 candles missing. Every cabinet door is wide open. All of them open up and down. There's no way that could be. I left the cabinet door open. That's it. That's it.
What was that?
That's it. It does not like cameras. I'm telling you, that's it.
We shared Keith's videos with paranormal investigator Dave Schrader of Darkness Radio.
Skeptical, yet it is intriguing. There are a few scenes, everything seems to be happening off camera. So automatically I begin to question, just because I've been in the position of a lot of people trying to fool the ghost hunter.
Keith says he's tried crucifixes and prayers, holy water and olive oil, but Bibles still burn.
Open like this, on fire.
He says the last family that lived here only lasted 5 months.
She said it was living hell there.
So why doesn't he leave when whatever it is won't leave him alone? Keith says he hasn't exhausted his resources yet and believes there's no guarantee that when he goes, the hauntings won't follow.
You don't know where the next thing is coming from.
In Bothell, Elisa Jaffe, KOMO 4 News.
Keith says he's also now working with a priest to find peace in his home, and the paranormal researcher Elisa interviewed offered to hook Keith up with the Ghost Adventures crew.
As you can see from that video piece, this is regarding some strange paranormal disturbances, some shocking disturbances, from a residential home in a place known as Bothell, a small town in Seattle, Washington in the US. And we were called in to investigate these claims for the resident Keith Linder. He'd contacted the scientific establishment of parapsychology, and of course Phenomena Project went heading to the US to try and find out if we could really prove these paranormal things were actually really taking place. Unknowingly, we were starting to become involved in what could only be described as America's most controversial paranormal case. The team Ghost Adventures from the hit television series in the US had apparently visited the location, and surprisingly, after giving the witness going over interviewing with them, asked them to participate in part of their investigation for an episode of Ghost Adventures. It was entitled Demons in Seattle, and unfortunately, even though that we didn't really come across any evidence to support demonic activity, it would seem that the name seemed to have stuck. Nevertheless, though, it was at that time being featured in newspapers, radio stations, and across television channels. Ghost Adventures did go in and meet with the resident Keith Linder, but not before sending a particular email, and we can see this email on the screen, and it says, "To Keith, is there any way we can schedule repairs until after filming?" That indicates to us that repairs were actually being carried out in the property, repairs on walls from things that apparently had been thrown and damaged the walls, things that had been thrown so hard they literally had busted through the actual plaster. Keith was paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars for people to come out, contractors, and repair the house. And unfortunately, this was not a good experience for him. He did tell Ghost Adventures that he was conducting some repairs, and they asked if he could reschedule repairs so that they could come in and film some of the damage that's been, taking place around the property. Of course, Zach Baggins from the Ghost Adventures team turned up to investigate the property and asked many questions, and of course asked Keith to participate in part of the investigation by walking around the house and shouting out, or asking out in some cases, to see if this so-called demonic activity would do something whilst they were there. Of course, taking in consideration, one of the first things that they did is go in and completely flood the house with infrared. They were walking around in the dark, and a lot of infrared cameras were actually utilised, so I want you to please remember that point. During the episode on Ghost Adventures of Demons in Seattle, the investigation of Keith Linder home didn't really reveal anything of significance. And what did they actually do? Well, they filed a no evidence claim. And it was because of this claim that there was no evidence that people started to believe that the paranormal disturbances taking place at the Keith Linder home wasn't actually happening, and that everything was really being filmed off camera. People started to distrust the word of Keith Linder and his partner Tina, who was also living in the same property as him. And it wasn't long before people started targeting them as thrill seekers and hoaxers. This obviously caused a tremendous amount of stress and upset between Tina and Keith, and unfortunately their relationship came to demise through this actual problems. So, taking into consideration what had gone on with the Ghost Adventures team, knowing that it had a huge amount of public interest and media interest in this particular case, we still headed over to the United States and the wonderful location of Washington. And we went all the way to the house in Bothell and met with the owner, Keith Linder, to find out what was really going on and could we really find any evidence. We were quite happy, and I had told Keith that if we don't find any evidence, we'll have to publicise the fact. It is what it is at the end of the day. So I headed over there with Mr. Don Phillips, and as we do know from previous lectures and information that we put out regarding the project, Don Phillips is in fact a catalyst, and it would seem that paranormal occurrences do seem to take place around him. So we headed there to see what we could obtain and of course document it for a probable upcoming episode of Phenomena Project. This is the Keith Linder house, and as you can see, it's beautiful. It's quite a large building, 283 square feet, I believe, and beautiful. It's only 10 years old as well, so actually the whole area, the whole small district of these houses being built are all around about 10 years old, so don't really have much prehistory involvement. Nevertheless, though, Keith Linder was reporting some amazing things. He claimed this destructive force was completely wrecking his house. On one occasion, he walked into his office to find it completely trashed. Wires pulled out, things turned upside down, completely wrecked. And he'd often come home from work and find the house in this type of state. And as you can see from the images, things have even been pulled out of drawers, things off shelves, things turned upside down, even a chair knocked over. It wasn't the only thing. Keith Linder would also come home and occasionally walk in to find all the kitchen cupboards open. Every single one, every drawer, every kitchen cupboard, even the pantry door. Sometimes cards and things scattered around the kitchen as if they'd been thrown. Tina also witnessed this on many occasions coming home. The couple had experienced disturbances even whilst they were away. These disturbances were notified and noticed, should we say, when they actually came back home. They came into the building and were met with all these things taking place. Doors, cupboards, drawers open, things being thrown around, upstairs rooms being trashed and turned upside down. Of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we were there to try and find out if we could obtain it. Surely, if there is some paranormal forces responsible for this, and it certainly does take some considerable amount of paranormal force to turn and wreck a complete bedroom, turn things upside down, then surely we must be able to pick up something, especially when I have Don Phillips in hand, a catalyst where paranormal phenomena does seem to take place around him. And as you can see from these photographs that Keith has taken, he's kept an extremely well documented log of events and photographs and even video of things that have taken place on a daily basis. On one particular occasion, he completely lost his computer. He had no idea where one of these computers has gone from his computer room. And it was only days later, I believe he found it actually underneath inside a cupboard on top of a pan. Of course, there was quite a considerable amount of damage that was taking place, and Keith Linder was having to actually go round and replace items that had been busted and broken. On this occasion, you can see how a television unit stand has been turned over, and things have been fallen out of the drawers, and it's on the floor. Damage was taking place considerably. Even chairs were turned upside down. Sideboards were broken as they were flung to the floor. Bed rests and sideboards were scratched and marked without any explanation. You can see some of the damage here. It's been occurred simply because a small wardrobe has been found, turned, well, literally fallen over. I mean, it never moved. On any occasion, Keith came home with Tina one evening to find out this was actually turned over in the bedroom. Somehow it had been forced to the ground. Scratch marks appeared on these lovely wooden bed frames. He couldn't explain where they'd come from. They suddenly just appeared from nowhere. Of course, it was upsetting to see a beautiful home being damaged in this way. Even expensive pottery was often broken or found to be broken. In this case, this beautiful pot, which only had been purchased not long ago, was found smashed to the floor. And apparently not even near its resting place where it originally was located. No explanation as to where and how these breakages took place. Even to the point where Tina claimed that she was being scratched by an unseen force. You can see Keith Linder has actually taken photographs of her arm. It wasn't long before Tina had had enough. You can well imagine that she soon got out of that location. And unfortunately, the relation became, he demised. Keith was left living at the house on his own, scratching his head and trying to figure out what was actually going on. Now, many people have asked this question about why would Keith stay in a home which he rents? Of course, he would often go to his bedroom at night and, even though the odd thing would happen, such as strange noises and things, nothing would really disturb much of his sleep. That was then at that particular time. However, he would certainly get up in the morning and start finding things had moved around, and certainly some things had been turned over or broken, or things had actually even disappeared. It was a regular paranormal incident. On one particular occasion, he came home from work and noticed literally a chunk missing from his bedroom door. And as you can see from the images here, he actually located that piece of wood missing from the door, and it was actually propped up against the monitor of a computer, as if purposely laid there to find. A great effort in trying to stick that piece of wood back onto the door. This would seem to be a regular purpose, a regular thing that Keith was having to do, come home and start making repairs. On another occasion, the lampshade, which is actually out of reach because it's actually on the staircase, so trying to reach this, as you're walking towards it, actually stepping downstairs, getting actually further away from it, completely shattered for no apparent reason. And glass shattered down the stairs and onto the front sitting room couch and table and around the area. Certainly took some time to clean the whole mess up. He had no explanation why this was suddenly found broken in this way. Other lights had been completely damaged. In fact, some of them literally is as if they'd been ripped from the ceiling. The shades shattered and found on the floor in the upstairs hallway. And you can see the actual light is on still, and it looks like it's actually been ripped from the ceiling with no explanation why or how that could have happened. Things started taking a little bit of a twist. On this particular occasion, Keith went into his office and noticed something quite unusual. He noticed a piece of paper that was actually sat on his printer had looked like it had been burnt, and he couldn't explain the reason how or why. How could that have happened? And this is when things started to happen of an incendiary nature. Things started combusting or singeing or burning. This particular crucifix that Keith had up on the wall, and he did have a number of things like this around the house, trying to ward off evil things, evil presences and evil spirits. Keith didn't know what he was actually dealing with. He thought he was dealing with probably something quite demonic, when in fact it may have just been mischievous spirits. Nevertheless though, on this occasion, this actual crucifix on the wall, you can actually, he went in there and he could smell burning. He didn't know where it was coming from. It was only a period of over a matter of a day or two, he started to realise that it was singeing around this crucifix which was on the wall. And as you can see on a close-up image here, you can see where the burn marks have appeared on the wall around this crucifix. As to how and why this may have taken place, we do not know. Suddenly other things combusting. In fact, Keith was a big fan of Final Fantasy games and liked to play games on his Xbox. He'd obviously got this beautiful poster, and it wasn't your average poster. It was a little bit expensive, this particular one. He was quite shocked to find that suddenly to come home and this being on fire. On this occasion, we believe the fire department were actually called out and did a routine check. Obviously, the fire alarm was going off. A report on that incident was actually noted, and they actually said that they couldn't find any explanation why such items may combust. Even to the point where Keith has been wearing things at the time. This particular shirt on his way out to work would suddenly seem to combust in certain areas. Keith jumped up in pain and noticed that part of his shirt was smouldering. He had to rip it literally off his back, and he could see clearly that there were singe marks, holes in it as if been burnt. On another occasion, as he left for work, he opened the front door and walked out and realised his whole shirt was open. As he couldn't understand. As he went to button his shirt, he was surprised and was quite shocked to find that all the buttons had been removed from the shirt. We don't know how or where they'd gone. In his frustration, he had to go in and change a shirt and then head off back to work again. You can see the singe marks that have appeared on other shirts over a period of time whilst he's been wearing them. This was a growing problem and certainly a growing concern for Keith. It was something that he wasn't prepared for. He didn't expect these sort of incidents to happen during a paranormal infestation. It escalated to the point where even Bibles, and there has been a number of them, completely decimated. And this particular Bible he placed out and was found in this manner, maybe a day or two later. It looks like it's been completely decimated. A number of other Bibles which were placed, this one on a particular shelf underneath another shelf on the back wall on his upstairs hallway. This particular Bible was found in this manner, and as you can see, there is not a lot of ash around. So it's not, we don't believe, a case that the Bible has been moved around a lot. What is also interesting is that there are no smoke marks or scar marks on the wall. It seems to have just been affected that local area. There wasn't even any heat or marks or smoke marks, burn marks of any sort on the wall or even on the underneath of the above shelf. It was a complete mystery how and what was occurring here. What we can say is that certainly the Bible seems to have been burnt, but from replication, from testing the pages of these Bibles, it would seem that there's a more feasible explanation to suggest that the heat had been applied to the pages of these books as opposed to a living flame. We would have assumed that the damage to the location would have been more significant than what is seen in current videos and photographs. Another Bible found burnt. You know, this was a regular occurrence. When these things happen, Keith would get another one. And he did explain that a lot of these Bibles were actually practice Bibles. And this particular one, we can see this billowing effect as it seems to, the heat is applied to the pages and seems to have burnt the outer edges first, moving inwards slowly but surely. Again, another mystery as to why and how these Bibles are burning. On another occasion, one Bible was found completely torn up and scattered all over the place. All the upstairs rooms were filled with bits of ripped Bible. And again, no explanation how that could have occurred. But probably the most significant incident regarding the Bible was this particular one. This Bible was placed out downstairs, and the following morning Keith got up, went downstairs and looked, and he was surprised to find that no Bible was there. It had completely disappeared. Expecting it to only turn up in a few minutes later or an hour later, it actually turned up 14 months later. And this is when he was lying in bed one morning when he smelt fire going off, and the smell of fire in the air, and the alarms, the smoke alarms, was suddenly burst into life. He rushed out his bedroom door to be shocked to find the particular Bible on fire on the floor. On another occasion, one particular Bible completely disappeared again for a long length of time. And when Keith was placing his washing into the washing machine, he switched it on and walked away, and he stopped because he heard some thumping sound going on and coming from the washer. He thought, that's unusual, I've never heard of that before. It would seem as if something's in there with my washing. Although he didn't recall putting anything in there apart from his washing, he stopped the machine, drained it, opened the door, and was shocked to find the return of one particular Bible. It had disappeared for a number of months. This particular photograph was taken at that time, and you can clearly see that Bible is still actually wet as he's just taken it out of the washing machine. But it's not the only things that were being found burnt. A number of photographs that Keith had was also showing evidence of heat being applied to them. But what is interesting is that it would only seem to have been Keith is where his head and facial area on the photograph seemed to be adversely affected. Although other parts of the photographs seemed to be fine, it just seemed to be that Keith was somehow targeted some way by these incendiary conditions on these photographs. Also, it was reported was a strange phenomenon of electrical occurrences, strange phenomena taking place. Now, we do know and we are aware that in poltergeist infestations, there are many occasions electrical disturbances, and this may have actually been one of them. Keith has made certainly a lot of information depicting what are the events as they unfolded. On many occasions, they've had literal power losses in the house, as if on some occasions the lights and power would all seem to dim and come back up and sometimes go back down. On a couple of occasions the power was completely lost, and when ringing the electricity services he was informed that everything seemed fine, that power was going into his house. He couldn't explain it, only for it to burst back into life several minutes later. Some of the things he has made a note of, and he says weird phenomena wrote on this piece of paper, light loss, is lights that are often flickering. He was also having numerous problems with his car. The lights would flash, the horns would go off, the alarms would go off for no apparent reason. And his car was often kept on his drive or in the garage, actually in the house. On this next piece of video footage, you'll see Keith, who set up a camera in his office, and he's unaware. He sat downstairs listening and watching television when in fact the light starts to flicker at extreme rate. What is also interesting is that through high definition analysis of this particular video footage, you can clearly see from the analysis that the light switch isn't even being switched on or off. So what is causing these strange flickering effects of lighting? And it isn't the only place it's happened, it's also happened in numerous other rooms around the house, which have also been documented and video recorded by Keith Linder. Other disturbances, such as things being thrown around. Plants were discovered, thrown on the floor, broken plants and plants pulled from the plant pots. Other things just tipped upside down. It was a terrible, terrible mess. And this was a regular occurrence, even tall plants knocked over. Scratch marks appeared on walls and headboards and other furniture around the house. Of course, there was a considerable damage to the walls, the plastered walls, with items which are apparently projectiles, things that had disappeared, such as a candlestick. On one particular occasion, a heavy candlestick had disappeared for a duration of some time, only to be launched through the lounge one particular day and to hit the wall in its return, causing severe damage. On another occasion, Keith was leaving for work one particular morning around about 6:30 a.m. As he described in these drawings, he says he walked to the car to load his laptop into the car, and I turned to look back at my office window. Why? I do not know. And I saw the blind cracked open a little bit. Not super unusual, except it lowered quickly 2 seconds after I turned to face it. The office light was off when in fact I left it on. I went from the office to the car to load my laptop to take with me. And on the close-up, he gives you the representation from the diagram as it cranked open, as if something inside was watching Keith's every move. And probably one of the most significant incidents with Keith was not only when he first moved into the property, he wasn't aware that there were paranormal things going on, but on that very first night, him and Tina, on their first night in the home, heard a child coughing from upstairs, which is very interesting because the neighbours didn't have any children, and there were certainly no children in the building. They couldn't find a rational explanation for it. This particular photo, Keith was sat at his table in his kitchen when he heard some type of strange noise, as if something moving down the staircase. When he was shocked, when he lifted his head up to look, he saw a face and two hands peeking round the corner, watching him. He described it as maybe a young girl with lots of dark coloured hair. On sighting Keith, she actually scrambled back and seemed to have scurried upstairs. Keith was obviously in shock when this happened and certainly didn't pursue it. Whatever this person was, could it have been an apparition? There was nobody else in the house apart from Keith, and Keith has certainly well documented this event. On one particular occasion coming down the stairs, Keith even may have been pushed. He did claim that it could have been a push. He was unsure on exactly what had happened. He traversed the stairs many times without problem, but on this one particular occasion, as he was just turned the corner to come down the last few steps, he suddenly found himself at the bottom and in severe pain. It certainly damaged his kneecap, as you can see from the x-rays, and had to spend a considerable time bedridden as his leg was in plaster. But unusual markings did continue to appear. First, starting off on his computer desk, trying to figure out what are these marks. To look at it, it looks like a hair, but in fact it isn't. It is actually some type of marking that has appeared on the top of this table. And to his shock, he came in one day and in his office was this. A 666 drawn or somehow painted on to these double doors. On close inspection, they're very, very peculiar. He didn't believe it was paint nor tar. He couldn't exactly work out exactly what it was. He had no idea. And this is the first time something of this significance had ever happened. This continued on to other markings appearing on the wall throughout his office. And on a close inspection of the ones on the door, you can see this very strange billowing pattern. It would seem that whatever's responsible of making this up, he seems to be utilising a pattern of lines and dots to make up these symbols. They are absolutely profound. I really do not know. We have talked with a number of people who are in the professional decorating business, and they were quite surprised to find this and said, well, they didn't really know what the source of application was. We've also talked with artists, and what they basically said is that some of these are an absolute work of art. What are these strange things, these lines and dots? These are very close-up photographs, but these lines and dots represent images of strange markings all around his office. It couldn't really have been dripped, neither, because some of these are actually situated on the ceiling in his office. What are these? I've no explanation for them. but they are profound and they do have this undulating pattern. Take this particular photograph, the first one on the left, looks like a bit like a backbone. You know, there is certainly an undulating pattern to these, of lines and dots making up these images. You can see a marking appeared on the ceiling here, certainly looks to be something related to maybe Native American. And it was proposed that maybe Keith's house could have been built over native burial sites. We did talk with a priest that visited the location and conducted an exorcism. Even though he didn't witness anything, he did believe there's a possibility that the house could have been built over Native Americans, burial grounds. A local shaman also agreed that that could have been the actual case. However, there was only around about 60 to 70 houses on Keith's estate, and surely there can't be more people than just Keith having these experiences, is there? It would seem not. That isn't the case. I mean, half the neighbourhood realised when Ghost Adventures turned up that they were filming there. They certainly don't shy away from any publicity. And Keith would have certainly have heard about other events taking place in the local vicinity. However, that wasn't happening. It would seem that Keith's home is the only affected one out of the whole estate. And it's certainly quite profound. As for the markings, we have no idea what they are. Continued investigation led me to be interviewing Keith downstairs in the front room, where he often reported the occurrence of cameras being turned. And at this moment he was explaining to me how one particular camera, these small video cameras, which are not controlled by any means, you literally, the only way for them to turn is to physically move them, have been found turned facing the wall on numerous occasions, and Keith hadn't done it, and he was in the house on his own. We set up numerous cameras ourselves and started monitoring the location. I was taken around and showed the damage to the property, and I thought, okay, let's see what progresses through the night. And we decided to go around. I even checked the door. This is Keith, the best repair Keith could do on his door on the damage that had occurred. And I'd also taken notes in regards to the type of disturbances and when they had started in 2012 and it continued to 2015. And we noted these on graphs as the most significant incidents seemed to be taking place around the spring, what you refer to as the spring rise or spring equinox, and also the summer rise, the summer solstice. But there was a number, say 2 or 3 events that did not fall into this pattern. It does not follow predictive path. We also looked into the lunar cycle correlations to check to see if there's an association regarding peak experiences and peak increases. August the 16th, 2012's new moon, April the 16th, 2013's waxing crescent moon, August the 16th, 2013 waxing Skipper's moon. Do you know, it doesn't really matter what was happening. There was not a significant lunar cycle at the highest times of phenomena taking place in Keith's home. So what was actually happening there? We did go and talk with the priest, and he was a lovely man, Father Roy, who had visited the location, and he was absolutely adamant that he conducted the actual exorcism there at Keith's home, and we've actually seen the video footage to prove so. What is interesting is that after Father Roy's visit to the location, it would seem that the most significant incidents, such as the writings on the wall, which had now at this time been painted over by Keith, had stopped. The trashing of rooms has stopped, but there still was often frequent disturbances taking place throughout the home on a daily basis. I do believe it was probably more poltergeist related than hauntings. However, how could this be? We do know from talking with Father Roy that he agreed that the fact that there was some type of poltergeist infestation was taking place, and that normally we need a catalyst or focus in the vicinity for it to usually feed on to create further phenomena, as we've discussed in other lectures that we have carried out in regarding poltergeist disturbances and infestations and how they work. Nevertheless, that wasn't the case. On many occasions, most occasions, Keith was actually there on his own. Sometimes he'd come home from work and finding things had taken place. There was no explanation. Well, who was the catalyst? Who was the focus? Could it have been Keith, an adult? He didn't seem to have any problems. We did certainly go through some psychological questions with him and an assessment, and he didn't seem to fit the bill for someone who may be a focus or catalyst for phenomena like this to manifest. Could it have been some type of interactive haunting? The phenomena seems to be remnant of a haunting and poltergeist infestation kind of rolled into one. It's a very mysterious type of phenomena, and it's not often we come across cases like this. This is some of the equipment that we managed to actually get into the US, and there was a lot we did take with us. We took mountains of different types of equipment with us to conduct every feasible experiment we possibly could in the hope of gathering as much evidence as we possibly can. We even utilised thermal imaging cameras and night vision equipment, specialised meters, and of course audible analysis software was taken into so to conduct on-site analysis whilst we were there. We were on this particular time, we were there for 6 days, and we absolutely hammered it, roughly doing about 19 or 20 hours per day. We also interviewed the neighbours, interviewed people who also previously visited the house and experienced such things, and went to visit Father Roy. We also went to obtain research records from Bothell Community Town Hall, where we put in applications for information pertaining to previous builds and other information that might give us some clue why paranormal phenomena is taking place there. And as you can see, more mountains of equipment utilised. Even optical tripwires were taken, and of course numerous different listening devices, be it parabolic, and numerous type of floodlights, you name it, we took it there. The equipment and the sound analysis, incredible software. As we say, we did conduct analysis whilst we were on site, and we were stunned, absolutely stunned in regarding the amount of recordings we had obtained at that property. In total period of time of 6 days, we'd have achieved of capturing 420 odd different types of EVPs. This is the pattern of events documented by Keith Linder about different things that happened, including fires, including strange sounds, sightings of apparitions, and so on and so forth. He writes at the bottom here to Anthony McDaniel, I understand the feeling. I remember that house, he writes, in Bothell. The previous tenants had the same problem. Now that's very interesting, because if it is a haunting phenomenon, we can suggest that maybe that the house may have been haunted prior to Keith moving in there. Would the previous tenant have known this? Apparently information was obtained from the previous tenant and confirming yes, paranormal phenomena was taking place there. And one of the most significant events was in fact the cupboard doors and drawers being found open. In fact, the last tenant before Keith was only there for 5 months before she fled the location, never to move back there. Another email. Keith writes, hello Laura, Tina's out of town in Vegas, work related. I bought some sage yesterday on the way home, and it lit and I lit and spread it throughout the house several times. Last night, after I lit the sage, my front door slammed open and my ADT security monitor, which is the alarm, went off saying front door open, and it does. We've been there and experienced that. I went to bed around midnight, and when I woke up in the morning prior to leaving the house, I noticed in the den on the lamp table, the Bible I placed there months ago is missing. This Bible was put there by me when the haunting started back in July. It's gone and would have had to have disappeared last night while I slept, because I saw it last night. A very interesting remark, because this isn't just Keith telling us about these events that took place once we arrived there in 2015. They've also documented at the time of the event, which he has wrote to somebody here called Laura about that event back in 2012 when it happened. Another one. Last night was the first time noticeable damage to the house was done. He writes, the entity last night during the VP debate picked up an iron candle rod holder and hit the wooden floor by the front door. The rod is bent and noticeable mark is on the wooden floor by the front door. I was in my office at the time. Tina was in the bedroom unpacking. The noise was loud, and when we met in the hallway and looked towards the front door, the iron rod was no longer standing but was perched leaning on the sofa. I lit some sage at the house and it was quiet after that. Major event, because number one, it picked up something slightly heavy and hit the floor with it, only to rest the object on the arm of the sofa. Yet another reported incident at the time in 2012, but what we were told about in 2016. Of course, it wasn't long before interest grew and Fox News picked up on the story and sent 2 people around. These are 2 members of the Fox team, and a video engineer and a sound engineer. And I managed to be able to have a long discussion whilst I was there with them. And they also agreed that there could be a possibility that the house may have been built on a Native American ground, but we hadn't found any evidence to support that at this moment in time. Another reporters from local newspapers. This is from the Woodinville newspaper. This young lady came out and she was shocked to hear some of the recordings that we'd obtained whilst we were there. All in all, a number of events did unfold at the place, which certainly indicated to us that paranormal phenomena was in fact taking place. Just on their very first night, after retiring to bed at usually about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I was alerted to the sound of a door shutting in the hallway around about 5:10 in the morning. I shot up, went into the hallway and noticed all the doors were still in their resting positions as they were when I went to bed. So what was it that made that loud sound of a door shutting? I couldn't find any explanation. As for the 2 other occupants, Keith Linder and Don Phillips, I could clearly hear them snoring. We were fast asleep. Of course, recordings were taken throughout the night on equipment on many occasions. And of course, a considerable amount of analysis was going to have to take place whilst we were there conducting our investigation. Keith Linder had also had numerous different cameras around the property. Now, these particular cameras are motorised ones which he can control from his laptop. On many occasions, he used to sit watching them turn as if being controlled, and it wasn't even him. Now, we could always argue the point that somebody had maybe hacked into the software and was controlling them somehow. We do not know. Nevertheless, though, Keith was setting these up and obviously going to work and leaving them running, and they are set to motion detect and would actually take a photograph when picking something up on the motion camera and saving it. It would also email Keith to his computers or laptops to let him know that there'd been an alert and a photograph had been taken. Hundreds and hundreds of photographs were taken in the property, but never revealing anything. We have to ask the question, what was it that was setting off the motion detector on these cameras? This is another camera which Keith was also talking to us about, it often being turned facing the wall. Now, this is not a motorised camera, but what it does do, like the other cameras do, is that when it takes a photograph under motion detection, it will alert Keith. It will send information through as a Wi-Fi connection to his laptop or computer, alerting him that this particular photograph was taken at this particular time in this particular area because there was a motion detection. And in this particular occasion, myself, Keith and Don Phillips were all sat in the kitchen chatting away, and we'd been there for at least the last 40 minutes when all of a sudden we were interrupted by Keith's laptop pinging. And Keith looked over at his laptop and looked over to us and said, "Oh, well, that's interesting." And we said, "What?" And he said, "One of the cameras has sent a photograph." And it was the photograph of from this camera that was set up in the front living room facing towards the front door. Again, in this same area, he reported this happening before. We looked at each other and we looked at the photograph. What is interesting is that the photograph was nothing. It was just the wall. But how can the photograph be of the wall when the camera was facing towards the front door? On inspection and walking into the front living room, we realised very quickly that camera had been turned 180 degrees and was facing the wall. Now, these particular cameras are often, a lot of these types of cameras and can take a photograph within 12 milliseconds. Maybe we should have picked up a photograph of it in transit of movement, but that is not the case. It would seem that the camera somehow must have physically moved by on unknown means, because we were all sat in the kitchen at the time, there was nobody else in the building, and we know exactly when the photograph was taken because it's time-stamped when we were all in the kitchen. Something could obviously have moved this camera 180 degrees to face the wall, but I can only assume it moved it so fast that it was more or less instantaneous, because no camera photograph was taken through its transition of movement. And taking in consideration, if it can take a photograph within 12 milliseconds, surely the movement of this camera to 180 degrees would have taken longer than that time, and surely would have taken a photograph in motion. That isn't the case. We ended up just with a photograph of the wall. It's a very, very fascinating incident, which proved to us that physical phenomena was actually present in Keith's home. Don Phillips did enter a particular location, an upstairs bedroom, where he did start to feel some type of, well, what he refers to as some type of energy. This was quite profound, and we went and got the FLIR thermal camera, and of course, as Don described, in this particular location there was an unusual thermal hit on the wall, probably just a little bit larger than the size of a basketball and round in shape, and we've no idea what it was. In fact, you can see from this particular slide on the thermal camera, the photo shows in green this particular thermal spot. And what is actually interesting is that from the video footage of this, there are some unusual audible sounds caught in the background. Not just myself and Don talking, but certainly seems to be a lot of chatter going on. We've no explanation for this. What is interesting is that it lasted throughout maybe 3 or 4 hours and then disappeared. Again, the following night at the same time in the same location, we went up there with thermal cameras to see if we capture it again, because if it's a natural thing, then it will be there again. And it wasn't. It completely disappeared. Also, what is interesting is that it was exactly the same conditions with the heating system not on in that location. Whatever that strange mark was, it never did reappear again. You can see through the analysis that we've obtained throughout the episode that it clearly shows that that was the only thermal hit we had which we couldn't explain. We'd taken numerous other pieces of equipment, and Keith had also had pieces of equipment himself. On this occasion it was a night vision binoculars. And we did utilise as many pieces of equipment as we had, even a laser grid, for help visualising anything that might be moving in the environment on video footage. Also utilising these type of things. Now, we did know that it seemed that when we first got there, some of the phenomena, it was suppressed. We were worrying that maybe the thermal cameras, the infrared cameras were suppressing. And we decided to change the method of investigation to utilise, go back in time a little bit and utilise some older type equipment. Optical tripwires were pulled out and utilised. And what is interesting with these is that when you set them up, they shine out a laser. And when that laser line is broken, an alert is sounded through the microphones. We'd spent maybe a good 12-15 minutes setting these up, and as soon as we set them up, myself and Don went downstairs. These are set up on the upstairs landing where most of the activity was taking place. As soon as we hit the bottom step, all of a sudden these things sprung into alert mode. I was shocked. You know, why have they suddenly all just gone off? We'd literally only left it seconds ago. We're at the bottom of the stairs. We just stepped off the last step. I turned around to rush up the stairs to find out what was going on when we both heard scampering sound as if somebody was running away, maybe a child. And in the process of doing that, actually set off the device a second time as if running through it. We gave pursuit, but we couldn't find anybody. There was simply nobody there. And as for why these optic lasers were set off on 2 occasions, we have no idea. And what was that scampering sound? Sounded like a small child running away at pace. Probably one of the most significant audible captures is this one, which was obtained from a very small digital camera sat upstairs, again in the hallway, whilst myself and Don are utilising a Tascam to capture recordings on. And as you'll see from this piece of footage, myself and Don head upstairs and Don is checking his Tascam. At this time, the small video camera is set on the side, and the idea is to point the Tascam and the video camera looking at each other, so that if anything is moved, the small camera would pick it up. Nevertheless, though, we're heading upstairs and it's only us two. And when Don checks to see if he has the memory stick inside it, the memory card, he thought he hadn't, and then he had. And of course, just as he's placing it back down on the side, you'll hear a male voice, which seems to say, "It's a camera, it's a camera." And further on, Don asks for the EMF meter to be turned off, which is making a ticking sound. And as Don says, "I need that sound switched off," that tick, 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 another voice comes in. This time it sounds like a female voice saying the word night cam. Now, it's not a word that we'd often use. We tend to use night cameras or night vision. We don't tend to use the slang name of night cam. It seems probably maybe an American terminology, which certainly would be befitting considering where the investigation was taking place, in the heart of Seattle in Washington, United States. Have a look at this footage and listen out for "it's a camera, it's a camera," and the words night cam.
Okay, Steve, let's go out 5 minutes, and what we'll do is we'll put this recording unit in one of the rooms and just leave it. We'll see one of the rooms. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it here. Yeah. Because this will capture then sound from here, sound from there, and also even sound from down there. Okay, so I'll just power this up.
Where is it?
I thought I put it in there, hold on. Wait, it isn't here. Sorry, it isn't here.
Now at this point, Don places the Tascam back down, and this is where you'll hear it. Whoever's voice that is certainly not mine and Don, as you can hear us in discussion. And the very fast words "night cam" appearing with the footage. Whatever is responsible for making these noises, it certainly isn't myself and it certainly isn't Dom. What also is interesting is that neither of us at any time heard anything but our own conversation.
Downstairs, leave the room for 10 minutes. We'll come back up and see if we capture anything. Because up here we've had some very, very strange sound anomalies. It sounds like voices in static.
Another one. Another recording was taken downstairs. Now, taken in consideration, whilst we're there and doing our investigation and research, we're also trying to film an episode for Phenomena Project. On this particular occasion, Don had asked me for the third time to actually walk through the front door for a scene on the video footage. And it was certainly interesting to note two vocal responses that seemed to be caught on the cameras, which we didn't, again, hear anything at the time. This one seems to be a female voice that says, "I love her." And then a little bit further on, the words "on 3" are said. We've no idea who this is. There certainly weren't any females in the environment, and we didn't hear anything at the time apart from our own conversation.
I've got a line
here. "I love her."
Oh, Steve, we need to go out together.
And on 3. In fact, most of the recordings that we obtained had lots and lots of vocal responses on them, and we don't know where they came from. As part of the investigation, what we tend to do is walk around the property when we first get there and take a series of photographs and videos. And as you can see on this particular video, it's only 2 seconds long. And what we have a habit of doing, or using our mobile phones with excellent cameras on them, is walking around and taking a 2-second video piece in different locations of the house. As soon as we've taken a 2-second video, we take an immediate photograph. We do this on purpose because sometimes, and only sometimes, that on occasion we get a difference between what is caught on video and what is caught on camera. Now, this particular photograph and video section was actually almost missed, and we completely forgot that we'd actually taken footage and photographs on our mobile devices as well when we got to the location at Keith Linder's house. And it was through this series of small video pieces and photographs that we actually noticed something quite remarkable. Now, on the piece of footage that you're about to see, you can see I'm on the staircase and looking down. You can clearly see shadows on the wall of where the actual table legs are, and there's a light source in the corner of the room. What is interesting, after taking this 2-second piece of video footage, I immediately taken a photograph, and it is the photograph that depicts something quite strange. It would seem to have captured what can only be described as a kind of a shadow on the wall that looks figure-shaped. Now, we do note from that the light source is in fact in the corner of the room, and it's shining a light over and casting a shadow as roughly at 45 degrees angle. But it would seem that the particular photograph is not characteristics to the shadows of the rest of the things that are casting in the room. You can see the angles of shadows casted here from the video as it is in the photograph, but it would seem that the shadow is at a different angle. You can see that the actual area, the location where the lamp was situated, casting that angle of shadow, and where the photo and the videos were actually taken from whilst where I was stood. I could clearly see that nobody was in that environment with me at that time. The only is a single light source of angle in the room, and I couldn't clearly see anybody else there, so I knew I was alone. Nevertheless, these are some of the photographs and video footage that was seen. Also, there was an unusual occurrence regarding this pink plastic ball. It was placed off the table and on the floor whilst we were talking to Keith Linder. Don Phillips was stood to my side, and all of a sudden something moved on the other side of the room, on the other side of the table where Keith Linder was sat, and it was in fact the curtains. The curtains had somehow moved slightly, and it would seem that what had happened is that somehow the plastic ball had transitioned from my location over towards the other area in the lounge where these curtains were. The ball had somehow hit the wall, and how it had got there was probably the most profound thing. To have traversed past myself and Don, and through the table legs, and through the chair legs, and past Keith's legs, who was also sat at the kitchen table, through it all that, and to hit the other side of the wall with some force enough to make the curtains move is quite profound, because when we went to try and replicate it, we realised very quickly that the ball wouldn't even pass underneath the side struts of the chairs around the kitchen table. A mystery we couldn't find out how to explain. Unfortunately, nothing was actually caught on camera at the time, but we can certainly verify that actually did take place whilst we were there. Also, Don Phillips decided to go underneath the floor of all things. And yes, we did lose him for a good 25 minutes. I was quite concerned at some stage and was moving around the house trying to find out where Don's position actually was. He went under there to see if there was anything going on under there. Was the paranormal things taking place underneath the house? After all, it was surmised at this time that, Indians may have been buried. It was a burial ground of Native Americans. However, we never really found any evidence to actually support that. Don, some time later, came back up and said he did in fact capture some strange audibles. whilst he was down there, some of them quite profound. On this particular footage, you'll hear Don scurrying around in the darkness under the house, 283 square feet of it. And at one particular time, you'll hear stop and the words, "Oh Jesus."
What was that about?
What is also interesting about this particular piece of video footage is that Don's walkie-talkie suddenly just burst into life for no apparent reason. He didn't know why that happened, and that happened several times whilst we were there. All in all, we had quite a number of recordings. Probably some of the most significant were captured on a recording device that Don often uses for capturing such things. Nevertheless, though, vocals were captured across multiple pieces of equipment, from video cameras, small, medium to professional, audio recorders and numerous other items. Here's one such vocal that was captured.
My ears.
I hear some rings. And now it does actually sound like it has an Irish accent.
My ears.
And it certainly seems to be female. It would seem Don had captured quite an interesting vocal response here. Why would it have an Irish accent? And if that is the case, then what is the connection? And only through research some time later, by help from an associate who was also in Seattle called Patty Hale, who assisted us on the investigation and research, that some information was found out that Irish settlers did actually were in that environment. What they did is they visited that location many years ago to cut down trees. Of course, Keith's estate, or the housing estate, is built over old forests and maybe in areas where Native Americans did once live. Nevertheless, those trees were no longer standing because they were cut down by loggers. Those loggers may have been certainly Irish in accent and living over here, moved over towards the United States to get work and were living there at the time. Could this be a connection to the Irish settlers being there? We do know through historical information that there had been skirmishes and battles between the Irish and the Native Americans time and time again.
Hmm? Hmm?
An interesting one, it seems to be that the sound of somebody saying hello and then huh. We don't know what that is, but again, it's another audible thing that's been captured and we cannot explain. These EVPs, some of them are quite profound. An incredible one stipulates the words two of us speaking. I'll play that once more for people who are hard of hearing. Very interesting. And another. He cares for us. Very fascinating. We don't know where these things are coming from, but it's scattered in the hundreds amongst our equipment. And of course, we didn't know we were capturing these at the time. It was only when we got back to the United Kingdom and going through our analysis and video footage that we were suddenly quite shocked to find that most of these things were embedded across the audio side of the video footage, across different types of cameras from different days around different locations. Also, taking into consideration, there were audio digital recorders that had captured the very same thing. And on 3 separate occasions whilst I was over in Seattle, I heard some type of vocal response come directly out of the air. Oh yes, Keith Linder's house was most definitely haunted. We can see from some of the information on these slides, we understand how the human ear works, and why could we not hear these things at the time they're being recaptured on our recording devices is certainly a mystery. And it is how we came to the conclusion that we must be obtaining things what we refer to as transplacement, where the spirits, if they are in fact spirits, are and do have the capabilities of transplacing verbal or certain messages, vocal messages, onto certain dedicated pieces of equipment without our knowledge. We do know also that certain experiments have taken place in regarding people who have loss of hearing or were born with no hearing, and in some cases small incisions and medical practitioners have shown that there is capable ways of getting around these problems by fitting a cochlear implant. Now we can see from the image below here the human ear, the outer ear and the ear canal and the inner ear and the mechanism, the ear fibres should we say, and the ear bone. And we can see the word cochlear there, and it is this location where these devices have been inserted under medical examinations and procedures. And we can see from this particular photograph that this is exactly what has happened. The cochlear implant completely bypasses the defunct normal hearing mechanism, which of course is the eardrum, and stimulates the auditory nerve directly by means of an internally implanted electroassembly. Absolutely fascinating. In other words, we can actually hear without the eardrum vibrating. So surely, if something was to transplace to the area of our inner ear known as the cochlea, we would be able to hear something we couldn't record. And we have had that on many occasions where we've heard some vocal responses that seem to come out of the air and our recording devices haven't heard it. There was on one occasion myself and Don heard a female voice, even though that recorders were running at the time didn't pick it up. Could it be that we both heard this in a form of transplacement directly to us, as spirits can apparently also do exactly the same thing with applying or transplacing vocals and verbal remarks onto recording devices? It is absolutely profound. This is what we refer to as the area of paranormal mechanics, and what we refer to as the area of study known as transplacement. And another example, 3 recorders which was set recording. Like I did mention on previous lectures, I also used exactly the same recorder as Don Phillips does. Exactly the same make, exactly the same model. On a test, we set all 3 recording for 20 seconds and in an environment where it was complete silence. We were shocked to find that all recorders are set for about, well, in this case it was 10 seconds of silent environment. One recorder, the first one, recorded what sounds like a female voice saying, "I love you." The second recorder sounded like a male voice saying, "Who's that?" And of course the third recorder, which sounds like it didn't just got pops and clicks for some reason. We don't even know what those are. But what is interesting is that they all seem to have recorded something significantly different when they all should have been recording exactly the same thing. Simply 10 seconds of silence in a silent environment. That it wasn't the case. It does show that maybe that if they are spirits, they do have some methodology of being able to transplace directly onto a piece of equipment and not the one sat next to it. All 3 recordings were different, and the test was replicated numerous times over a 45-minute period and was successful over 8 times. The further test procedures points towards transplacement phenomena, not harmonic. Equipment, sound control and tests in the environment have been taking place. Equipment shielded against transients, such as with 6 layers of aluminium foil. 6 layers of aluminium foil and placed under a glass dome. Equipment placed in airtight containers, sealed up and placed under 2 feet of water. And under all these conditions, results 1, 2 and 3 revealed audible vocal recordings quite clear on the device each and every time. It's also interesting to say that when glass dome recordings took place, the sound sounds like it was in the dome with the device. We had vocal sounds in there, and it does sound like it's under the dome with the recording device. And as I said at the Play Cottages earlier, vocal sounds were heard by myself and Don Phillips, yet none of these things were recorded, even though recording devices were running at the time. Also, vocal sounds recorded on video cameras, many different types of video cameras during investigation, and yet nothing was heard in the environment at that time, just complete silence. It's very, very profound how the mechanics of paranormal phenomena does work, but slowly and surely we're hoping to chisel away and point towards small pieces making a bigger picture. One thing is certainly is an area of research is what is referred to as transplacement. There has been a number of questions and clear responses. We have had some questions, and it's interesting to note that for the last 31 years prior to me meeting Don Phillips, I have never experienced these types of vocal responses as clear and as common and as often as these we actually are getting in his presence. It would seem that Don Phillips is certainly a catalyst of some sort, and he has the capabilities. You could call him an ITC specialist, and you know, instrumental transcommunication, and does have some way of capturing these things on a regular basis, no matter where he is, or when night or day. Sometimes you do get better responses in certain locations when Don says the energy is higher. But some of these questions we've managed to put forward, I would never have given it any thought many years ago. But when I suddenly realised that I could ask a question and actually gain the response, I was a little bit hesitant at first. Do you really want to know the answer? Really? Questions and clear responses. We ask questions such as, does heaven exist, and what is it? And what is the process of death? What limitations and advantageous things do we have as spirits? Do we age? Do we feel the cold? Do we sleep? Are we hungry? Do we get hungry? Are we controlled or governed? Do demons exist? Is there a God? Can you see into the near future? Does angels exist, even aliens? And of course, these are just some of the questions we've asked, and I will explain what the answers were maybe on another occasion, because I'm hoping that you will watch and see this episode for yourself, explaining the responses that we obtained at the time, which really knocked me for 10. The last thing I expected was some of these responses to say the things they did. Absolutely incredible. I'm sure it might shed new light on a subject that we know very little of and have been trying to chisel at since the early Victorian days.
In November 2015, we received a call from Keith Linder claiming his house was haunted. It transpired we'd been investigating one of the most controversial cases America had ever seen. Opinions are split. Some people believe this to be a hoax, other people believe it to be genuine. Keith wanted answers. We was going to find the answers either way.
If I want to read out.
I'm sure there'll be some evidence to support an Irish settlement here. You know, it's going to be a really, really, really interesting case.
Keith, it wasn't long before inexplicably events began to unfold.
Whoa. You guys know where this has been since you've been here.
I can't see why that would fall off because it's got very deep set holes.
Know if any vibrational
Falling off nonchalant.
Well, that's really interesting. We did hear the sound from downstairs. It was a louder sound than it did seem through the replication, but definitely this on the floor, and it didn't. You can't get it off there. How did it fall? I don't know.
And we were not the only ones to witness the voices.
Well, you could hear that, you said?
Yes, I could hear it. It was picking up because you had the microphone on. It stood back. It was "We Are Spirits," and then I couldn't understand. We were trying to figure out the last one. It was like 2 or 3
yeah, it
people.
wasn't.
It wasn't the last part. The first part was.
The first part was very, very clear.
First,
We Are Spirits.
Yeah.
But obviously, you was filming as well. You got the headphones on.
Yeah.
So that
and then I had the nat mic. Plus, it helped out a lot that you had the other microphone on.
Yeah.
So it could be clear that way too. So.
The evidence tonight has been absolutely staggering. Nothing less than that. We came here. We listened to Keith's story. We visited a priest. That priest told us something quite phenomenal. That there was evidence, or he believed, that the building, Keith's home, was built over, well, you know, settlements of people who have passed away and maybe still be here. And of course that's led to something quite unique. Don going out downstairs underneath the house of all things. And in fact I was a bit concerned earlier on because we kind of lost him for about 20 minutes, and you know, we could hear him puffing and panting under the floorboard. We lost track of him. Nevertheless though, he popped his head up, you know, absolutely flabbergasted. He said he's got these recordings, and I thought, well, okay, let's listen to them, you know. And I went over there, we put them on, and you know, I've never heard anything like it. They were as if they were there just talking to him. Interestingly, all Irish accents, many of them are so clear. I'm just gobsmacked.
My ears.
And I've done a little bit of research since we heard those voices. And it come to find out the Irish settled in Washington State in the mid to late 1800s. They prospered very well here in Western Washington. They were bankers and farmers and newspaper publishers, and they were middle class to the very wealthy here. And they didn't have to face this discrimination that they did in their country. They had freedom of religion here, and we still have a very large population of Irish descendants, from people from Irish descendants here.
People come over here, you know, Native Americans or shamans, and they were saying that this at one time was, you know, it was tribal land, and you have to ask him. He's saying that they found out some interesting stuff about this area. So
when they did the research, there's
a
lot about the native.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, that could be part of it.
Yeah.
And this is only day 3 out of day 5.
It's terrible outside. Is there any Irish gentlemen or ladies here? Thank you. Okay guys, can you please confirm for me the brothel case we've just done, that there is nothing negative and nothing there to harm or the intent of harming Keith Linder now? Thank you. I confirm. Absolutely fantastic.
Hello.
Hmm?
We have managed to confirm at this moment in time, now the investigation has come to an end, that yes, Keith Linder was witnessing some paranormal phenomena, certainly, significant paranormal phenomena in his home in Bothell in Seattle, in a building that is only 10 years old, and was having disturbances there prior to him even moving in, which was confirmed by previous tenants. We did not find any information pertaining to Native Americans being built, Native Americans actually buried under the house. We didn't find any evidence to support that, but we did find some evidence to support that there was Irish settlers that were in that location many years prior. And it was certainly interesting that some of the vocal responses that we did manage to capture did seem to have Irish accents. It was also to note that the phenomena was sort of extremely intelligent and extremely evasive, and did understand and know what certain things were, like technology and cameras, and how to evade them. As we've heard on the footage, one particular so-called spirit saying, "It's a camera," trying to identify the equipment we're using, so to evade it or not. And it's also interesting that further material has recently come to light where we've captured vocal responses in a locked off area of the upstairs bathroom where some type of vocal is captured, and we can hear it say image capturing device, which to you and me is a camera, but it's certainly unusual terminology. What is it, or who is it? It's saying all these things. Since then, Keith has moved out. He couldn't live there any longer, and he's left those disturbances behind. The landlord has decided that he doesn't want to continue to rent the property and he's going to try and sell it. Again, I assume that he doesn't want to have any reoccurrences or any problematics from other tenants.
It was January 2016. We visited the home of Keith Linder. Keith was once again called upon our services, and we're back.
I've asked Dawn and Steve to return because there's been some new developments.
We are going to be beginning the investigation in about 10 minutes' time. I can tell you that already we have had some very significant things occurring. As before, environmental monitoring equipment was set up, recorders were placed, and the rooms were sealed off.
We got tripwire going off in the master bedroom.
And just like before, it wasn't long before inexplicable events began to unfold. We are still looking into why this picture would have left the wall at the same time the alarms were triggered. Also coinciding with the alarm going off. One of those events was these strange substances that began to weep down the walls around the house. Steve Mehra takes a sample for analysis. Motion detection equipment on the landing was triggered, producing these very interesting anomalous images. Attentions were then drawn to the woods and the creek which lay beyond Keith's house. Once again, voices were captured, disembodied voices from here and from around the house. And this is just a few examples of the many, many recordings that were taken during the investigation.
So to speak.
Well, our second visit back to Seattle to try and finalise these problems that Keith was having, we did have an independent observer, Nick Kyle, the president of the Scottish Society of Psychical Research, who confirmed our practice of research was reasonably credible, and the things that we were capturing were in fact quite strange. Nevertheless, though, Keith was forced to have fled the house to go and live somewhere else. He couldn't live with the disturbances any longer. So, casting your mind back to the beginning of this lecture when Ghost Adventures went in, and as I said, if you recall, remember what they did. They went in and flooded the location with infrared cameras, taking also into consideration that they were dealing with highly evasive spirits. If they are in fact spirits in the first place, they're certainly intelligent and certainly evasive and certainly understand what technology is. And if that is the case, then you knew how to evade all these cameras when the first team went in, Ghost Adventures. And of course, because they didn't capture anything, like on some occasions we didn't, because they were being evasive, they confirmed that there was no evidence, and of course this is how the whole thing seemed to have triggered people thinking that it was a hoax or things were happening which are off camera, and they didn't believe Keith when he declared and claimed that paranormal things were actually taking place. And it was us, our visit there on our first visit was 6 days, our second visit was for 8 days, and in that time we immersed a huge amount of evidence to confirm and finalise once and for all that Keith Linder's home in Seattle, which he did share with his girlfriend Tina when he moved in 2012, was a very most haunted location, and probably continues to be so. I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating documentary when it actually comes out for you to be able to view all the evidence at hand. There is also information going to be put into a book which is due out this year, known as The House of Fire and Whispers, which is compiled by myself and horror writer Jenny Ashford. It is referred to as the Investigating the Seattle Demon House, so do watch out for that. If you want to find out any more information about the investigation process through Phenomena Project, please visit the Phenomena Project website at phenomenaproject.tv. And a number of interesting videos on the subject should you want to visit our YouTube channels at Zohar Stargate TV, zoharstargate.com, and of course Zohar Entertainment Group. And we would like to thank you, and we'll finish off by the official trailer.
Throughout history, mankind has been searching for the answers to the secrets of the world. Visionaries, scientists, and scholars have all pondered the same question. Is there an afterlife? An eternal existence which awaits us all beyond our physical being? Or could science finally prove or disprove the existence of the afterlife? Now, for the first time, science and supernatural forces meet head-to-head as two men take things one step closer to revealing the truth on a journey of scientific paranormal exploration into the unknown. Join renowned paranormal researcher Don Phillips and parapsychologist Steve Mehra as they leave no stone unturned on a venture that just might change your life forever. Tonight, Don and Steve investigate paranormal disturbances at Mill Street Barracks, Liverpool. The barracks is said to be a hotbed of unexplained activity. Don captures ghostly voices during an underwater experiment. A discovery is made which sets the duo on a search for evidence leading to a recording studio and onto a church. And what happened to Don's hand? All this and more in tonight's episode of Phenomena Project.